Thank you so much for coming to our session today, the discussion forum entitled From Forest to Markets, Making Supply Chains Greener Through PPPs. Does anyone wonder what a PPP is? Hands up, please. Any more? Public procurement policies, or some people call them RPPs, responsible purchasing policies. And this is all markets and industry talks. Now, I'm terribly sorry that we are already almost a quarter of an hour behind time. Miriam, we welcome you also. Thank you. No, don't worry. Don't worry. And we intend to have our 4 experts who are sitting on the podium give you an 8 to 10 minute snippet of their vision of how we fulfill the requirements of these supply chains and markets through procurement policies and other means. Let me introduce our distinguished speakers to you. Firstly, we have Mr. Hiroto Mitsugi, ADG from the FAO. Hiroto will do a keynote presentation as well as his own FAO presentation for the first 10 to 15 minutes. Next, we have Dr. Jürgen Blaser from Bern University. And Jürgen has worked with ITTO for very many years. And he's currently helping ITTO and other partners, including the CPF partnership, with restoration guidelines in tropical forest landscapes, which is linked to investments and financing landscape restoration. Third, we have Madame Miriam Kuzi, and thank goodness because she adds an element of gender balance to our panel. And Miriam will speak on the commodity supply chains in the landscape continuum. Lastly, penultimately, we should have Dr. Robert Nasi from C4, but he's currently presenting at another session and he will join us later, so he's not yet up here. And lastly, we will have my boss, Dr. Gerhard Deetele, Executive Director of the ITTO, who will speak to us on green supply chains in forest landscape management and a circular bioeconomy. Quick note for all the speakers. I'm so sorry, but we're going to have to be very strict with timing. So you have between 8 to 10 minutes. I have to cut a little bit of slack for my boss, ladies and gentlemen. So, so boss might have, a couple of minutes extra. After which we will have an exchange with members from the audience. And please, you are entitled to ask either difficult questions or simple questions, but please keep your intervention as short as possible, maximum 3 minutes. And at the very end, we wish to show you a video clip of one of ITTO's projects that is a very successful outcome of community forestry favoring gender again. And this is called the Malebi Charcoal Project, and this video will be about 6 minutes long. So, without further ado, may I invite Hiroto Mitsugi? Floor is all yours. Thank you.
So this is the one, I do this one. Yeah, I hope so.
For the PowerPoints. For the slides, gentlemen. We use that?
It's coming. Okay, thank you very much.
Oh,
This one. Okay, so very good morning, everybody, and thank Sham so introduce me, and then also I very much appreciate ITTO to organize this discussion forums. So, my task is opening, but I will be touch upon that what we are doing to with several partners to talking about that forest value chain. And of course, everybody knows that the bond challenge to bring 350 million hectares of deforested and also the degraded land into restoration by 2030s. So this demand is a quick, fast actions to put into place to the policies and the measures and investment that will allow the goal to be met. So ensuring that sustainable forest value chain are integrated into the forest land restoration project is a fundamentals to provide socioeconomic and also financial feasibilities of restorations and the maintenance of the forest land with catalysis of public-private partnerships while providing the ecosystem services required for the achieving sustainabilities. And also this, I'm going to just touch upon that opportunities to accelerate the restoration effort that build on the sustainable forest value chains, and also this value chain that delivers ecosystem services and the forest product. And also considering the forest production within the restoration plant, in particular, but not only wood productions, to provide the development of the diversified range of the business that can generate employment and incomes in all-inclusive manners while contributing sustainable rural and urban landscapes. Okay, it's working. So, what we know about the challenges of the forest land restorations? So, the significant effort is needed to speed up land restorations. And then also first land restoration should generate the business opportunities and the scale up or the benefit. And this is if we have integration that with the commercial value chains. And of course, we need all your participations. We have to make it jointly to work together. And also economic feasibility of large-scale forest land restoration depend on the large investment that only productive capital can attract. And of course, the world needs still is many demand for the wood fibers, non-wood forest product to achieve sustainability. So the first landscape restoration equals increased ecosystem services plus forest product. The equation for the successful forest land restorations delivers not only ecosystem services and also sustainable forest product, but also improved people's livelihood and increased the supply of renewable materials and reduced the carbon emissions. So this is a quite vital benefit we have to take from this forest and land restorations. So on this slide shows some of the pavement, the pathway to reach its forest and land restorations. So as you can see that this chart, forest and land restoration is a key for inclusive development path. So paved by the segment of, namely the green value chains, from starting seed collections, nursery, and of transportation, market, enterprise. We need producer associations and also local and as a market and end to reach for the end users. And of course, the local context will define this segment of the path and whether we can extend the first management stage toward the integrated value chain stages. But having a clear view of the possibilities should guide the restoration strategies for achievement of optimal outcomes. So, how to integrate forest restoration and the value change? The fact is that it is possible to make a forest restoration on economically viable and socially inclusive activities through the partnerships between the public, private sectors, and the communities. We can have the right mix of incentive and investment. So promoting vertical and horizontal integrations will also provide for the development and empowerment of smallholders and small businesses, and while improving their access to market. For instance, promoting the multi-stakeholders platform to support decision-making on the restoration plan, also with common objectives and clear responsibilities. And incentivizing the producer associations while also working on enhanced integration between the larger and the smaller business and with downstream processing business, and creating a network of investment and services that support the restoration activities with strong anchors in the market. Even yesterday, we have so many discussion forums, so everybody just talking about how just maximize the benefit from the forest and land restorations, including that and forest-friendly coffee planting, cocoa, and so on. And we have so many business opportunities on the process of forest and land restoration activities. So how do we try to find out is a good business opportunities and also call the investment from the outside? Major precondition is we need the partnership among public institutions and private companies and also communities. It is quite important to proceed these activities. So this is my final slide. So forest land restoration contribute, of course, directly to SDG 15. But if associating the restoration effort with sustainable value change, in particular, wood value change, can ensure the ambition we need to and contribute to achievement of multiple sustainable development goals as illustrated in this slide. So we are now mobilizing that, namely Sustainable Wood for Sustainable World. This initiative is led by IDTOs, Seafood, and the World Bank, WWF, and also FAOs. So we are now on the stage just developing the idea to moving forward for this forest and landscape initiative with wood value change. So let's join effort, also make it happen. Thank you very much.
Hiroto, for an inspiring opening speech, and also all the efforts that are currently being taken by the international organizations under the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. May I now call upon Dr. Jürgen Blaser to come and give you a quick snapshot of what we're doing in terms of the restoration guidelines revision process. Thank you, Jürgen. All yours.
Okay. Good morning, I can still say so. So I have to do it very fast, I understand. No big introduction because the Kalashnikov behind me, 8 to 10 minutes. Initially it was 10 to 12. Okay, so I will present briefly the current activities of ITTO to revise its guidelines. And maybe many people will not know because you are a younger generation, most of you. ITTO was the first international organization that had developed guidelines on forest restoration in 2002. And there have been policy guidelines used in ITTO member countries, which are the most important tropical timber countries in the world. They have never been really applied. One of the main reasons is because, there was a missing link with investments and financing. So ITTO decided, and ITTO member countries decided to relook at these guidelines 2002 and to revise them. And me and with my colleague Cesar Sabogal from Peru, we are working on a draft revision of these 2002 guidelines. And we had a great expert panel meeting 2 weeks ago in Bangkok. And I recognize several people here who have been in this expert meeting, members of the CPF, the Collaborative Partnership on Forest, NGOs, and different governments. So I briefly give you an overview in 2 or 3 slides. What is the link between these guidelines to investment and financing forest landscape restoration? So first of all, let me show you. The expert meeting has defined the objectives of these new guidelines, building sustainable tropical forest landscapes, so as an overall objective of these new guidelines. The focus is on restoration of degraded production and protection forests and forest lands in all tropical biomes. So this is what was defined together. It is at the same time a policy level guideline and technical operational level guideline with cross linkages and references between the two levels. The approach we describe restoration scenarios as a continuum in the landscape. I will come back to that one. And the guidelines will be structured along restoration outcomes. And that's important because outcomes, this is finally what it will be. No? It's not, restoration is a process, but an outcome is an outcome. So we'll come back to that one also. And the focus of these outcomes will be on economic feasibility, on investments and financing. So this is the idea behind these guidelines. The structure of the guidelines, very briefly, part 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5, the important one, which I will focus now, because I hope that I get some guidance from you on this one. Guidance for financing tropical forest landscape restoration. That will be an integrated part of these new guidelines. Okay, let's go back to the continuum of forest landscapes, humid, semi-humid tropics. This is the focus area of ITTO. You can, with this image, you can see the two extremes, conservation forests, non-accessible forests, still intact forests on the left. On the right one, the last 30 years of deforestation and of mosaic landscape use. And in the middle, production forests, concession forests, community forest production forests. We have about 12 million hectares of certified forest management in this production forest, which altogether, according to ITTO, is about 160 million hectares. And a huge chunk, as we know, of so-called degraded forest, opened up forest, secondary forest, and sustainably managed forests. And here in the middle, this is somehow this middle ground, where these ITTO guidelines and ITTO work is concentrated. We can put a line here in between the production forests. There's a part it's maybe sustainable, another part is unsustainable, and we can put the overall landscape in what is original forest landscapes on the left and degraded or modified forest landscapes on the right. So somehow the guidelines look into these different parts, these 3 sections, and it is mainly, and this is this is the comparative advantage of ITTO, mainly here in this field, less in the mosaic landscape, but more in this opened up forest, degraded secondary forest, and sustainably production forest, where ITTO finds its particular niche on these guidelines. Now, let's look from the investment side in forest landscapes. So you have here on the right, the mosaic landscapes, planted forest, agroforest, agricultural, and pasture linked to forests. There is a direct use value. You find easily capital for this type of work. I come back to that one. So I call it, this is from the investment side, relatively easy to cover. So, because there is a direct use value. On the left side, the conservation forest, the protected forest, the original forest area. There is existence value, there's option value, there are bequest values. All that, there is a readiness to finance that for different reasons, not for a value now, not a direct, but for a future value. It's also relatively easy to find capital investments at that level. And we have instruments, global instruments, GEF, etc. But in the middle ground here, indirect use value of this process of different types of degraded forest. What is the fate of this natural forest being in this continuous degradation process? That we have to look at also from an investment perspective and the financing perspective. So somehow this has to go, and these are then the outcomes. It has to go either on the right side towards mosaic landscapes, because they will be valued on that one, or to the left side, as protection forest or as sustainably managed production forests. So there are 2 options to do something with this degraded forest area, not to leave it in this. This is, of course, the issue of restoration. So if we look at an example, a case study on that right side, there are many case studies, and of course we talk a lot. This is a very recent study we did with CIFOR and the Swiss program in Kalimantan, to show you, the change from a landscape which was a closed landscape with shifting cultivation areas until a road was constructed, the northern road in eastern Kalimantan, was followed by a logging boom, logging ban, then a rubber boom, then an oil palm boom. I will not go into the details of that. So that's what always capital involved in this process for different reasons. No? Of course, you can talk for the economic reason, maybe macroeconomic reason was interesting. Maybe from the local perspective, and this is indeed what I show here with these last 3 boxes, from the local perspective, quite substantial in the change. No? Not only from the landscape level, but also from the local level. So the whole package of social inclusion plays an important role when you go from a degraded forest landscape that is still under forest jurisdiction to a changed landscape, no, where people are involved. So this is what I showed here with this right arrow. If you look at the other situation, the left arrow, no, to go towards forest, natural forest, degraded natural forest back to more functional natural forest, production or protection. This is a complete other situation. And also a complete other situation from the investment perspective. Because you can't find so easily, no, the investments going back, no, to functional forests. So the value criteria are completely different. It depends on your goal. This is illustrated with this small figure. If you go more for biomass, carbon stock, and carbon sinks, or you go for more biodiversity outcomes or for production outcomes. It depends, no, what you do. So low, medium, or high use intensity at the level of the forest. But important, all that goes towards what is called sustainable forest management as an outcome, no? This right side. No? And this is a core element that ITTO, of course, has in mind, setting the right line for adaptive management at that level. Permanent forest estate investments, what is it? You know, what can we do? And what does it mean? And market prices for high value end timber, NTFP niche markets, etc. This is a complete different field than the mosaic landscape approach. No? So where do we go, no, at the level of addressing outcomes of restoration? There are indeed 4 possible outcomes from an investment perspective. The first one are integrated tree-based models, cash crops, cocoa, coffee, easy to find capital. Very nice examples, also in this landscape forum. Of course, you find the capitals for that. Also, commercial planted forest models, timber, fiber, biofuel, bamboo, easy to find capital because it's short-term, medium-term, 5-7 years returns, high returns, easy to find capital. A little bit more difficult, secondary forest management models. They are coming step by step. You know, you can do it. You know, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years rotation, still possible. However, the problem we have in natural forest production models. Where do we get the capital? What kind of capital? What kind of investments? Now, how can we do that to bring degraded natural forest back to sustainable forest management approaches? And the next slide is my last slide, then you can. So the thing goes towards what I call a portfolio approach that could help us maybe in this direction, and I will just explain that. Investments, matching public and private interests. FAO also already talked about that, how these 2 elements have to be very close together. Both have the same requisite, and this is very important. Acceptable policies and governance and adequate social inclusion in the long term. This is the condition for any and every type of investment. And from the public interests, if it is national or international, there are 4 major points to consider. Assure public investments, tax policies, incentive programs, etc. Maintaining ecosystem services, REDD+, maybe even new instruments, natural forest carbon stocks that are not valued now, no? Biodiversity, climate change adaptation models, all that, no, plays a role. Apply suitable economic policies for forest and downstream industries, so the topic that also we talk here, important. No, these enabling conditions must be prepared if we bring the forest on this right side towards sustainable forest management again. And create durable social assets, tenure, security, income, health, education, gender. This is the role of public of public investment, public interests. Private interests, if they go in a more green supply chain, short-term, medium-term returns are important, sustainably managing forest goods and service and developing the supply chain. But in addition, and I think this is the important element that we should think much more, is how can we bring capital in the long term to long-term investments, capital preservation strategies, so that we can really put and invest in bringing degraded forest back to functional natural forests. And for this is key to develop and to maintain assets through a diversification of investments. So the portfolio approach, where you can combine the short-term and the long-term, the medium-term and the long-term investments. So the guidelines will be developed in a sense that we try to find a solution package around this investment pack. It is this investment criteria. It's an ongoing work. We have just started a couple of weeks ago. So you're all invited to give us inputs, and we, for sure, over the next 8 months, we're trying to develop on this, and I hope we can create a big community helping us to think about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. As you can see, there are a number of elements that need to be taken seriously into consideration when thinking about the long-term viability of landscape restoration. Now, as our third speaker, can I please invite Ms. Miriam Kuzi to give you a snippet of what her organization has done on landscapes. Thank you. Thank you.
I was grabbing the, but I don't actually have a presentation. I'll just be doing it without a presentation. I was asked to have a look at commodity supply chains, forests in a landscape continuum for this session. And I think it's safe to say that companies and smallholders recognize that there's ever increasing competition for natural resources as lands get depleted and there is less productive land to convert. Despite the very high numbers we just saw on these degraded and secondary forests. And what we're often left with then is this mosaic landscape of different interacting land uses, oftentimes very degraded. And I hope that today we can discuss how forest landscape restoration in these different land use types can contribute to both sustainable wood supply chains and benefit people and the planet at large. Looking at plantations and forests in landscapes, I think it's also fair to say that there's an increasing realization that wood supply chains have an impact beyond the concession and plantation areas and those of smallholders itself, on the people that work there and on the provisioning services, ecosystem services of the wider landscape in which they sit, for other functions as well, both good and bad. Some examples are the frequent fires as management practices being used in some countries in large plantations, which are impacting directly people's livelihoods in surrounding areas. Increasingly, IUCN is approached by governments to assist in such areas using a forest landscape restoration approach to manage such fires and find alternatives, and at the same time to enhance livelihoods in rural development. Conversely, these high stocks of dead wood and dense undergrowth of trees and regrowth forests has also led to high risks of wildfires, recent examples in the USA. FLR interventions there would be targeted, in fact, to restore forests to their more natural state and management of invasive species. Some blueprints for these types of thinking and new models for forest restoration across large tracts of land in the USA are being developed under the Coalition for Private Investment for Conservation, something that was launched by IUCN during the last World Conservation Congress in Hawaii. Not just governments, but also wood supply chains companies are interested in forest landscape restoration. For them, it's about reputational risk, consumer demands, and legal compliance on the one hand, but also a growing recognition that forest landscape restoration provides opportunities for sustained production, cost-sharing opportunities and improve stakeholder relationships, especially there where encroachment is a big issue. And of course, then the governance of the operations and transparency themselves. Benefits of restoring forests is that they act as carbon sinks, can provide critical ecosystems for wildlife, prevent erosion, and can have significant positive impacts on health and well-being and tourism. And I think it is this big range of benefits that we need to keep in mind when we're discussing forests and wood supply chains in a landscape continuum. Smallholders and farmers do and should play a large role in the wood supply chain, where trees' functions help to restore degraded agricultural and silvopastoral lands, for example. There is a 1.5 billion hectare potential for restoration in mosaic landscapes involving incorporating trees, including agroforestry, smallholder agriculture, buffer, and riparian zone planting. I'm talking of trees and woody species, ability to build and conserve soils, control erosion, increase water retention, provide shade for shade-grown crops, and more. Increasing trees on farms can significantly impact livelihoods, agriculture and wood supply chains at the same time, and can meet household fuel needs. More than 1.5 billion smallholders depend on forest landscapes to produce food, fuel, timber, and non-wood forest products. Together, these smallholders also generate wood energy that has more value than several of the world's largest oil and gas companies, so they are quite a force to be reckoned with. Looking at the bond challenge to restore 350 million hectares of degraded and deforested landscapes by 2030, the area under agricultural production is large. And trees on farms are therefore anticipated to make a real contribution to the wood supply chain in years to come. This, however, does have its challenges, as the restorative features of trees is key to the restoration of landscapes. Not all trees are equal. Innovation is needed in the wood supply chain from trees on farms to be financially as well as socially and ecologically interesting for a wide range of stakeholders, with new businesses and partnerships. For companies to become more ambitious on forest landscape restoration, zero net deforestation, carbon mitigation, and adaptation, it is key to present concrete solutions that can be implemented to help strengthen respective supply chains, be it in wood supply or commodities such as coffee and cocoa. This is the landscape continuum where forests, trees on farms, and in mosaic landscapes are all considered opportunities. It would be prudent to develop forest landscape restoration investment plans at that landscape level with the different stakeholders, including private sector corporations, where the agriculture and forestry value chains come together, and develop additional guidance for business in forest landscape restoration supply chains. Very briefly, just even looking at the continuum scale of landscapes and looking at mosaic landscapes, when we talk about forests, plantations, agroforestry, it's also important to note that we need to reflect on the temporal and spatial scales. Over time, there can be reasons to initiate plantations in areas that are severely degraded and then move through time to other more natural forest types that provide multiple benefits. And it is in forest landscape restoration, this idea of multiple benefits and multiple strategies for a wide range of stakeholders, that's the ultimate goal. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Miriam, for some very thought-provoking points. Oh, sorry, your tea, yes, of course. From Miriam's speech, it's also quite clear that there needs to be possibly a paradigm shift in thinking on how do we actually increase supply of wood fiber through value chains. And of course, Miriam mentioned plantations, which of course some quarters of us don't like. But at the same time, we need to find this, this very delicate balance. It's a delicate and a fragile balance between regenerating severely degraded forest areas and reducing pressure on natural forest areas. Right. Now, can we please move to Dr. Robert Nasi now? So we're so thankful that you managed to join us. I was a little bit afraid that the clash might be a bit too disturbing, but let's hear what Robert Nasi has to say to us. Thank you.
Good morning. Sorry I've missed the beginning of the presentation, but knowing the people sitting behind me, I guess that at this stage they are probably convinced you that wood is a good product, that to be sustainably produced, and that having productive forest is a good thing. At the risk of putting a little bit of salt into the too sweet soup, I'm going to talk about the whole issue of forest landscape restoration. And remember that we are a bit like the Red Queen in Lewis Carroll novel. The Red Queen is running all the time to stay on the same place. And if she wants to go further, she has to run twice faster. So if we want to reach the land degradation neutrality, we need to restore 13 million hectares of land per year. But that is not taking into account the couple of billion hectares that have been already degraded. So we need to restore much more than that if we want to go beyond land degradation neutrality and if you want to regain ecosystem services and productive function in our lands. And it covers forest land, but also grassland. And then, okay, you start to think about that and you say, okay, that's a bond challenge, 350 million hectares, the AFR 100, the initiative 2020. So you have all these pledges that are sitting here. You have people that are actually doing restoration on the ground. The people that are making the pledge don't necessarily the one that are doing the restoration on the ground on their land. So like you have seen Yakuba yesterday, there is not necessarily a link. So it's something is missing. And then also you read the stories, I mean, sort of scientific publication. The world is losing $6.3 trillion a year in land degradation. $1 trillion. This is a mind-boggling number. Anything that is more than 90, I don't understand. But I mean, so the world is losing $6.3 trillion a year, and nobody seems to blink about that. On the other side, you read also that if we implement the bond challenge, for $1 you invest into restoration, you will get $7 to $20 in return. $7 to $20 in return. If investors knew that, they should be here at the door knocking to where can I invest? Well, that is not happening. So what is the problem? Why is it that we have something that is a huge cost for society, a huge cost for the environment, that is supposedly economically viable, providing a good return, and where action is cheaper than inaction? Why is it that it's not happening? Any answers? It's not happening, I think, because we need a sort of a deep paradigm shift and moving from restoration as being something that is a public or state-driven exercise to restore ecosystem and provide ecosystem services that mostly cannot be marketed with high cost per hectare on land that we don't necessarily know who is the owner of the land, mainly top-down, and transforming that into an enterprise. We need to have forest landscape restoration becoming a viable enterprise where you create products that can be used by the people. You may not be restoring exactly the forests as they were before they were degraded, but you move from a state of degradation that is fundamentally producing nothing, creating a drag in the ecosystem. What is burning in the peatland is the degraded land. There's not an instantly. So we need to move into, and we need to put some economic value. We need to change the paradigm in terms of forest restoration. We need to have research and development lowering the cost of restoration. We need to have economics. We need the private sector to invest in restoration. We need to provide goods and jobs. We need to create jobs via restoration. We need to have markets interested in that so that the markets can internalize this, can sell that. We need to have a bottom-up approach and not only a top-down. And unless we do that, we are likely to meet in 10 years from now and have the same discussion. Unfortunately, there is a very limited window of opportunity where we can do something about that, and I think it's really the time for action now. So it's all up to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Robert. Robert has just highlighted the missing link that Jürgen Blaser pointed out earlier on, and that is the need to show economic value. And also how to think as an enterprise. Perhaps try and adopt a more commercial approach towards land restoration rather than looking at it as a forestry and conservation approach. Perhaps a combination of both. Finally, let's hear Dr. Gerhard Dietzle with his presentation. And Gerhard will speak about green supply chains in forest landscape management and a circular bioeconomy. Please, Gerhard, all yours. Thank you. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. It's a great pleasure to be here. And this is the second time that I have the opportunity in this room to talk to a young and interested audience. And I think the theme of landscape restoration, which is the broader subject of this forum here, has many facets, and it has many angles to approach. The landscape restoration can be approached from different points of view, from the social point of view, from the cultural point of view, biodiversity. But our organization, which has a mandate to promote the trade with products from legally and sustainably managed forests, has to look at the context of trade, which is businesses, which involves private sector, and it involves government. And in that context, I would like to go back a little bit to a higher level of looking at the issues which we have at hand here, why we need to talk about landscape restoration in an economic context as well. So from this slide you see, this is an analysis in Science last year, which shows areas of land degradation. And the land degradation has been underestimated in the past because we always have looked at deforestation and the role of outside factors influencing forests and leading to deforestation. But from this slide, we can see that degradation happens around the big forest massifs, the Amazon, the Congo Basin, Indonesia, and in Kalimantan, and so on. And this analysis comes to a conclusion that degradation has a higher impact on climate change than deforestation. So they come here to a conclusion that it is about 68% of the carbon emissions are coming from degradation. So that means that something happens inside the forests, which can be climate related, but also human related, and so on. Another analysis of this year by Erb and al. In Nature comes to a similar conclusion, showing, if you look here, that this is the potential part of forest cover and carbon content, and this is what we lose from conversion, and this is from land management. Also here, land degradation is a major issue. And this requires different instruments, different approaches compared to look at agricultural landscapes and the conflict of food and nature. Now, if you look at land degradation in another context, we see that we have a fast growing population in the world. And until 2100, much of the growth in global population is coming from Africa. We have now 1.2 billion people roughly in Africa, and by the end of the century, it will be 4.4 billion people. Whereas in Asia, it will only grow by 400, 500 million people, and in other regions of the world, it is even a decrease. So now, if you look at the context of land degradation, which is already happening now, and the demand of 3 billion more people, especially in Africa, we need to consider that they not only need to have food for their lives, but they need, the same way as they have a food demand, they have also a wood demand. So we talk in our organization about wood security, because we need to have housing, we need to have energy, charcoal, fuel wood, and so on. That will not go away. And so this is the context in which we have to look at land degradation and landscape restoration. Now, we have a couple of hints what the future demand will look like. So, for example, here in Africa, you see that charcoal, wood fuel, would still grow, although we have in other areas in the world other energy sources at hand. In Africa, it will still grow. Industrial roundwood, here, the gap can be up to 6 billion cubic meters by the mid of the century. So imagine what happens if that demand is not met by investments, as Robert has mentioned and Jürgen has mentioned before. It will just increase more pressure on nature, on protected areas, on biodiversity, and we have a risk to lose much of what we see today. Now, we have tried to find out what is the situation in specific countries, and we have here six case countries. And in fact, that the supply gap is already happening now. It is here in this light green color is the supply gap in 2040 projected. So even in high forested countries like Peru, we have already now a supply gap. Peru is importing timber from other parts of the world. But then the next question is, what if this supply gap could be closed by 2040? What would it mean in terms of GDP, in terms of jobs, in terms of other benefits for local populations? And you see here, the light green is again, that would be the jobs we could create, the income we could create, the livelihoods we could create through more investments in those areas. But the other aspect is, which is now being discussed also at the COP24 in Katowice, we talk about a circular economy, a bioeconomy. So if that gap could be closed in these 6 countries, the light gray part is the climate benefit. It's a combined benefit from increased growth in the forest through more carbon absorption from the air and from conservation of forests. But the bigger part is coming from substitution. And I think that is a new element which is now being discussed in Katowice, that the bioeconomy part is as important or even more important than what you can achieve altogether in forests. And substitution has different aspects. One is you use, here in Germany, firewood instead of oil heating and whatever. It means wood construction in buildings. It would replace concrete, steel, and so on. And I think that aspect is in future more and more important if we want to keep the 1.5 climate temperature increase target. Also, if you would invest more in forests and landscape restoration, countries like Brazil and India and Indonesia, who still are in a steep economic development, infrastructure, with cities, with other high emission factors in terms of production. If more forests would be there, they could offset the part of that increased carbon emissions so that they can keep the NDC as committed to in Paris in 2014, I think, yeah. Now the question is, where would at least landscape restoration be coming from? What is our opportunity? So we have an opportunity here in primary forests, in natural forests, in natural log forest, in degraded forest, and so on. And it's quite clear, if we are lucky, we can keep in 2040 the area of primary forests, the undisturbed high biodiversity areas, as we have them today, if we are lucky. So the question is, where can we generate the carbon benefits? And it has to come basically from restoration in planted forests and agroforestry. I think that's very important, and also if countries design restoration policies and so on. And our calculations are that basically the total combined benefit of landscape restoration, of substitution, of a bioeconomy from forests could be about 8 gigatons per year, which is about 15 to 20% of the global mitigation gap which we have. So it's important to look at both sides, the benefit of local people in countries where degradation happens, but also at the global benefit which we could generate through landscape restoration. So basically, this is a summary of the benefit which we would have from landscape restoration and more investment into forests. But, and that is very important to say, these benefits can only be accounted if we have a clear picture where the benefits are generated, if we can manage to measure these benefits, if we can follow the products from the forest to the end product in a way that nothing is lost. Because if you want to generate a substitution benefit, you need to know where the product is coming from. If the product is coming from an unsustainable practice, from deforestation, that's no more a benefit. You need to deduct it. So basically, this is the origin of the need for working in coherent supply chains from the tree in the forest to the end product. Otherwise, you cannot argue that forests are contributing to climate change mitigation. Now, the problem here in Europe, for example, is that benefits from forests are not accounted under forests. They are counted under industry, for example, because the point is that, or the argument is that reduced emission in industry is the result from more use of forests. So it is calculated under industry, but that doesn't matter. We need to look at the overall benefit for a society, for an economy, and so on. Now that brings me to the point about supply chains. And we have said today that it has to be public and private. Now we are working currently with a number of Chinese, very prominent Chinese companies, leading companies, global players, biggest flooring company, biggest housing company in the world. And they came to us and said, we want to green our supply chain because we want to be a good player. We want to have legal and sustainable practices. And they said, well, if we don't get the products from the tropical countries, for example, in a way that we can document that this is legal and sustainable, we have different ways to react. For example, they said, we don't buy any timber anymore from Congo Basin, for example, because we can invest in plantations in Chile, we can invest in Australia or whatever. That's safe, it's under our control. And the other reaction here in Europe, in US and in Nordic countries is, so if we can not get tropical products anymore, we modify our softwood in a way that it is like tropical hardwood. And these technologies are available, they are applied. You can chemically and mechanically treat softwood so that it has the characteristics of hardwood. So also that is a risk that it pushes out a big part of the world, the tropical world, leading to results which are highly dangerous, risk for the social peace in these countries and the development of these regions. So I think this is, I do not want to go into all these aspects, but the risk is now that we have in tropical countries, if the management is not legal and sustainable, that if you look at the big cities, more and more will be done in concrete and steel and so on. These countries need to import timber from other parts of the world, which is a huge economic issue. It leads to more pressure on forests and existing forests. So the question is, what can we do to help to generate an atmosphere for private sector investments, which leads to more sustainable investment and legal investments and so on. And it is a very complex story, I can tell you, because a private sector company who commits to do something more legal and sustainable cannot do that without a framework. So this is why we talk here about policies and incentives. There must be a conducive environment for private sector, fiscal taxation instruments, other incentives, because like we do here in Europe or elsewhere with solar panels, for example, those who change, they get a benefit, a tax reduction or something like that. Then companies who are trying to import timber from tropical countries, they don't know what happens in these countries, because timber goes through a number of steps from the forest to the end consumer. And it is a very important issue that companies who want to buy, or companies in tropical countries, for example, who want to sell sustainable timber, they need to know where to do it. So we need market transparency, we need market information, we need to bring the partners together, and we need to get a platform for that. And so the question for information capacity building, we need to have tracking and verification systems, because what is produced in the forests need to be followed through the processing, the felling processing, the transport, the transformation in the sawmill and so on, to the piece of chair or furniture, so that the label on that can testify this is a sustainable product. So, and in summary, in this supply chain, it is not only Sustainable Development Goal 15, which we are talking about. It is a huge number of other Sustainable Development Goals in the cycle, from the project, from a product in the forest to the end consumer. So finally, I would like to give you an example of one possibly game-changing initiative of private sector companies. I have talked about these 15 Chinese companies who have come together and said, so we want to create a group of private sector companies who commit to buy legal and sustainable timber in the future. These are companies with a total trade volume already between 14 to 16 billion US dollars. And they say, we want to buy this timber from tropical countries, but where can we find it? So they are not responsible for the producer in the forest, but they would be happy to buy this product if it's available. It's the same like with coffee or cocoa. Nestle and other big companies, they are ready to buy these products. But the problem is how can we support these producers in the countries to be a part of the global economy and eventually also of the domestic trade inside these countries, because without that, they will lose their forests, as I have mentioned. So this is something we want to further develop together with the private sector companies and ITTO and with our partners here in the Collaborative Partnership on Forests. And it's basically is about creating a global platform, a neutral platform where these companies can meet and become members, can exchange information, but also can trade sustainable products and so on. I think that's where we want to be in 1, 2, 3 years from now, with an increasing number of private sector companies. And I think the new idea behind this is that we do not push from behind to tropical countries. You need to do more sustainable for this and this reason. But the pull factor from the private sector back to the forests, I think that's a new approach, which I think works with the support of these private sector companies. And with that, I would like to stop. Maybe I have taken a bit too much time already, but I thank you for your support and the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gerhard. So you see, ladies and gentlemen, there was a special reason for having the Executive Director of the ITTO as the last speaker, because he's given you an all-encompassing, broad umbrella view of how we feel as ITTO that this whole mechanism on supply chains could potentially work. But of course, as we know, the biggest missing link in all this is the means and resources to actually embark upon this complex exercise. Right, now, before we move on to the question and answer session, speakers, if you think your job is done for today, I'm so sorry, that's not the case. We get to the bonus session now. While we do the question and answer session, can I please request that each of you quickly think up a very short key message that you wish to see as a key output for this session towards the GLF final outcome. Of course, this is voluntary. If you would rather not come up with a key message at such short notice, that's also absolutely fine, but you're invited to contribute your thoughts. Right, now we would invite some question and answers from members of the audience. Please clearly state your name and who your inquiry is targeted towards, and please keep your intervention extremely short. May I have the lady at the back of the room first, please? Thank you. If someone could hand the microphone. Lily, sorry, Lily, could you help with? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Marta Tollenaar. I work for a company called New Forests. We're a major investor in sustainable forestry worldwide. My question to Gerhard is, how do you see the role of certification, FSC, PEFC, in what you're trying to achieve in terms of sustainable supply chains?
Okay. You want to collect a couple of questions first, or?
Do you want me to?
Yeah, okay. I think it may be.
All right. Thank you very much. Next one, could I have Mr. Ye from China, please?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so very much for letting us talking a little about the bamboo.
Why not?
竹子呢，这个产业呢和木材相比呢非常弱小，但是经过我们这十几年的研究呢，我们可以将竹子做成大口径的压力管道、城市综合管廊、高铁车厢、整体式房屋，包括这个军事上面的导弹发射筒和火箭舰身等等产品。
Actually, compared with wood industry, bamboo industry is quite weak, we would say. But after so many years of developing, we could already use bamboo to produce larger diameter pressure pipe, utility tunnel, chain couch, even military use like a locked launcher and so on.
那个我们把这种技术呢称之为竹长袄复合材料技术。
This technology is called bamboo winding composite technology.
那个有权威机构统计过，如果把全球的竹资源都利用起来，做成我上面讲过的这些产品，替代原来的钢材、水泥、塑料等传统的材料，可以降低全球的碳排放量10%左右。
So according to a rough estimation by some institution, that if the idle bamboo resources in the world could be utilized to produce those mentioned products, that approximately 10% of the whole carbon emission could be reduced. 10%.
当然，这项技术呢，要成为真正的绿色这么一个推动者的话呢，还需要政府的大力的支持。
Of course, these technologies still need, if we want to be a really existing green industry, it needs very much support, and from different government levels, both from national level government and local governments as well.
我来自于中国，我们中国政府呢对这项技术呢，国家层面上面相关的部委都给出非常大的认可和支持。
We are from China, and now the Chinese government have provided a lot of support to this technology and those related green industries as well.
特别是各地的政府，特别是竹产业的产区的政府，特别的重视这项技术，他们制定了大量的资金补贴政策和强制性应用这个产品的政策，来推动这个产业的发展。
Those local Chinese government, especially those governments with bamboo resources, they provide policy supports and investment supports, and also those requirements for using those products in the governmental infrastructure constructions.
所以呢，这项技术呢，在中国已经非常迅速的展开了。我们希望非常短的时间也可以把这些技术呢走向其他的国家。
As it has already been some contribution done by this technology in China, we also hope that this technology and the related green technologies of bamboo could be utilized in the world as well.
好，知道了，谢谢。
Thank you. Thank you so much. That gives us a rough idea of how alternative non-wood forest products can be utilized in a more constructive and a productive manner. And of course, they're not saying that bamboo is better than wood. Well, I hope that's not what they're saying. So anyhow, but thank you. Thank you for that intervention. Now, we had some other hands. Sorry, we had Petri and then the lady over there. Please. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? My name is Petri Lehtonen, and I'm from FAO, and I'm actually focusing very much on forest finance. And this question is especially to Jürgen Blaser. I thank you for an excellent presentation. I would like to challenge you a little bit, like when you said, like you categorized whether it's difficult or easy to raise capital for different targets. I think that you mentioned that it's relatively easy to raise capital, for example, the commercial plantations. I think it's actually quite difficult, especially in those developing countries, emerging regions, especially for greenfield. And for example, in Africa, that like last years, the pace of establishing new plantations, greenfield, has been actually slowing down. So I think it's a big challenge, and in a way, really need actually lots of efforts how to build up instruments. I liked actually what you said, but I think that we should have an additional dimension which is taking into account the regions or level of infrastructure or so on. I mean, when we look at the investments, so it's actually a little bit probably more complicated. Thank you.
Thank you, Petri. So that was an observation rather than a question.
If you want to comment on that,
Okay.
you can.
Okay. So, so right now we have two questions. Would anybody like to? Gerhard, I think the first one was definitely targeted at you. Your microphone works.
I think the microphone works.
Yes.
Yeah, there was the question from New Forest about forests, the role of forest certification. I think I have mentioned very clearly that if we want to demonstrate sustainability, if we want to demonstrate the substitution effect and other benefits from forests, we need to document the benefits. And we need to have a system which is neutral and which is impartial and which is beyond interests, vested interests and so on. And I think certification is so far the best tool we have at hand. We believe that there is not one single certification system, but there are now a number of verification and certification systems which are working very well, like PFC, FSC, and other national systems. And I think they need to play a crucial role in all types of legality verification and sustainability certification and chain of custody certification with different degrees of intensity. I'm quite cognizant that legality is already an important level which is difficult to achieve in many countries. So the way we should look at it is a stepwise move towards sustainability. Yeah. And maybe we need to differentiate in the intensity of how we verify and document that.
Yeah. Thank you, Gerhard. Yes. Gerhard is absolutely right in the sense that there are several mechanisms that are already out there. So as ITTO and together with our collaborative partners, it isn't our intention to kind of reinvent the wheel or whatever it is. What we intend to do is create a level playing field for the players in the marketplace. So of course there is a differentiation between legality verification and sustainability certification. But the phased approach would be the best way forward. Thank you for that, Gerhard. Did anybody want to comment on Petri's challenge, or can I take another question? Or would you like...
Maybe very short
okay,
the answer, and
of
course we can discuss that more in detail afterwards.
Yeah.
I fully agree with you, of course. This was a simplification to show, different cases, the big cases, where you get easily capital and less easy. And you're right, for plantation it's not necessarily that we have it very simply here. You get the money and plant. But compare this type of investments against sustainable natural forest management investment, where you have to wait 30, 40, 50 years to get a return. In the plantation, it's shorter in general. So that was just to show the different situations. But you are right. In the guidelines, we would, of course, recommend that country by country look specifically its specific situation to develop a portfolio approach in that level. You cannot just say it bluntly like that, as I presented it. But it was to show the tendency, nothing else.
Thank you, Jürgen. Okay, 2 or 3 more. Young lady over there. Lady over there. Okay, 2 might be just nice. Then we go on to the video before we put pressure on the speakers. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Gabriela. I'm a student at Tropical Forestry at TU Dresden, and I have a question about what are the efforts to incentivize the small holders of land? Because for the big companies, I think it's relatively easier to do any long-term investment. But for small holders, they only have a small piece of land, and they have a bigger risk of changing something that is going to bring money for them in the very long term. And I want to share also an example of in Guatemala, we have the incentives program, and they pay for the first years of production, and so people take care of and managing of the plantations. But if you have other experiences, and what are the efforts just for these small holders to do the change into a more like
Thank you.
sustainable landscape.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. We'll take the question from the lady as well and then see who from the panel wishes to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm from UNCCD. We are working for the Convention to Combat Desertification. My question is that we are talking a lot about what we need to mobilize the companies' participation. That is, we see that we already see some progress. Many entrepreneurs and business would like to join this process. But from another side, how can we mobilize consumers? They would like to buy and pay actual money for the same products. That is one question. The second one is similar to the previous speakers, is that we know the small stakeholders, land users, they are manager of forest. If they follow the certification process or they follow the sustainable management of forest, there will be increase their cost. Who will pay this incremental cost for the stakeholders can pay them? That is one. From another side, you know the land user, if they follow sustainable forest management, they produce not only timber products can earn money, but they also produce ecological products. Yeah. Who will pay for this one? As a general public from the government, or we would like to mobilize more consumers to pay for that? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, the second question is actually a one-hour conversation at the minimum. But if someone from the panel wishes to respond very quickly, the first question was, what do you do to mobilize the participation of companies and smallholders, particularly? It's more the smallholders. If anybody wants to respond to that quickly. And then the second question is how to mobilize companies and consumers. I can do both if none of you want to speak, but please. Go ahead. Yeah.
Well, I can give a start in incentivizing smallholders. I think there are a couple of things. The legal institutional policy environment is very important. We talked in the past a lot about land tenure, land rights, access to resources, and so on. I think we have extremely valuable results from land use, from land tenure mapping in indigenous peoples' lands and so on. We know from Albania, for example, the return of state forest land to local communities has stopped basically deforestation and so on. But I think that's only one aspect. The other one is scaling up the number of small enterprises to something which has a scale and a market weight through user associations, through cooperatives, through capacity building, learning exercises, and things like that. We can also talk about incentives for marketing and things like that. So I think maybe others have other elements to add to this.
Thank you, Gerhard. Would any of the other panel speakers wish to say something? Thank you, Miriam. Please do.
Yeah, I think another very important aspect of incentivizing smallholders to create change is, I think, a different approach as well to supply chains, looking a little bit beyond the strict sense of what the supply chain does to incorporate more of what smallholders are doing. It depends a little bit, of course, which smallholders you're talking about and which supply chains you're talking about. But in general, I think bringing in more of the needs of these smallholders into the value chain and production processes is very critical. Looking at cocoa and coffee, those are very easy examples, and I think taking on more perhaps a livelihood approach or diversification of household incomes, I think are very important ways to quite effectively incentivize smallholders to participate in that.
Thank you so much, Miriam. Thank you for that. Now, for the second question, perhaps we could have a discussion outside the room, if you like, but a lot of it has to do with awareness raising. A lot of it has to do with educating, even on the consumer side. And you see, a lot of people have been looking for green premiums for certified products or for legally verified products. Now, for my own country, my home country is Malaysia. For my own country, I represented the industry and we said to them, your biggest premium is market access. Market access, international as well as domestic, in terms of encouraging people to use either legally verified or sustainably produced certified products, with the full aim of extending the longevity of the forest's lives in perpetuity. That always has to be the final aim. But there are several elements to this. I mean, would anyone on the panel wish to say something towards this, or shall we just have the conversation outside? I'll point you in the right direction for the information that you need. Many efforts have taken place over the last, I would say, 25 to 30 years, doing exactly what you're asking. Any contributions? No? Okay. No? Okay, thank you. Now, to our media geniuses at the back of the room, can we now switch on to the video presentation, please, from the Malaby project? This will run for about 6 minutes, and then we'll quickly swing back to the speakers for their 1-minute thing, and then maybe you can go to lunch. Thank you. Are we ready now? Thank you.
Malaby est une association de femmes productrices et vendeuses de charbon de bois. Et notre objectif, c'est sortir les femmes du milieu rural de la pauvreté. Pour produire notre charbon, on coupait le bois de manière traditionnelle dans la forêt naturelle. Mais maintenant, la ressource se fait rare. Il n'y a plus de bois. Et nous-mêmes, nous avons vu qu'il faut penser à restaurer le couvert forestier. Donc, il faut reboiser.
Notre association, nous sommes des femmes. Et avec la SODEFOR, nous avons signé une convention pour pouvoir faire le reboisement. C'est la SODEFOR qui nous a formés, qui nous a appris comment il faut faire une pépinière. Il y a des pépinières qui se font avec des grains et il y a d'autres qui se font avec les bouts de bois. Et on a préféré les deux espèces pour voir ce qui peut marcher correctement. Quand on fait les pépinières, il faut 3 mois pour que nous puissions aller les planter. Et avec ce reboisement, les femmes viennent mettre le vivrier à l'intérieur du reboisement. Et par exemple, le manioc, le maïs.
Avant, on produisait le charbon de manière traditionnelle. C'est-à-dire, nous abattons les arbres, nous les entassons et puis nous mettons le sable dessus pour faire le four. Mais de cette manière, nous avons vu que nous détruisons la forêt. Donc, on a décidé d'arrêter ce phénomène. Quand on a sollicité l'EIBT nous a financé les fours métalliques et on a commencé à produire des charbons modernes. Et avec ce charbon moderne que nous produisons, nous avons pu produire en quantité parce qu'avant, c'était les petits camions, les petits sacs qu'on prenait pour aller. Et maintenant, avec l'appui de l'EIBT, nous avons des remorques où nous transportons soit 300 sacs, 400 sacs chaque 2 mois pour aller à Abidjan. Arrivé à Abidjan, on essaie de voir les femmes qui n'ont pas de mari, les veuves, on leur distribue le charbon et elles vendent pour nourrir leur famille. Ça, c'est le premier projet en 2009. Et ça a eu du succès. Et l'EIBT ne s'est pas arrêté là. L'EIBT a encore financé un reboisement de 100 hectares pour que les femmes puissent avoir de l'espace pour mettre leurs vivriers à l'intérieur.
On a décidé de planter le manioc parce que le manioc est beaucoup nourrissant. On peut faire du congondé, on peut extraire du placali, le tapioca, l'amidon, la tieke. Quelquefois, on vend et puis on a de l'argent. L'argent que nous gagnons, là, ça nous sert à aider nos maris et puis nous entretenir.
Au début, on avait refusé à ce que nos femmes travaillent avec la société Malaby parce qu'on n'avait pas compris l'importance de cette initiative. Aujourd'hui, on a vu qu'il y a eu beaucoup de changements et on a vu que les femmes elles sont regroupées. Et aujourd'hui, on a vu les femmes qui nous aident beaucoup, nous les hommes, financièrement, pour l'éducation des enfants. Et grâce à leur projet OIBT et Malebi, il y a beaucoup de choses qui ont changé chez nous ici. Nous avons 2 pompes fonctionnelles actuellement, que l'autre a été construit sur le fonds propre des villageois. Et le chef avait demandé l'aide à ces braves dames. Et grâce à leur projet OIBT et Malebi, ils ont pu décaisser de l'argent pour épauler le chef du village pour pouvoir construire notre pompe hydro-villageoise.
L'ANADER, en général, fait la formation, l'appui conseil, le suivi des exploitants agricoles. On leur a appris comment il faut planter le manioc, respect des densités MSC, comment il faut même planter la bouture pour que la bouture puisse vite pousser, vite germer. Et on leur a aussi appris les entretiens réguliers pour que nous puissions avoir une bonne parcelle bien conduite. Mais je pense qu'elles ont beaucoup apprécié. Ces braves dames travaillent bien avec Malebi et l'ANADER sur le terrain, avec Malebi, c'est Malebi qui leur a cédé les parcelles. Donc tout se passe bien.
Le projet PD 725-13 REV 2.F a permis aux femmes de l'association Malebi de développer de nouvelles compétences en matière de gestion durable et responsable de forêts, ainsi que le leadership dans l'intégration et la promotion du genre dans le secteur forestier en Côte d'Ivoire. L'une de nos plus grandes fiertés est d'avoir reçu, grâce au projet OIBT, le 3e prix national d'excellence 2017 du meilleur promoteur du développement communautaire, décerné par Monsieur le Premier ministre de Côte d'Ivoire. Nous voulons exprimer toute notre reconnaissance au Japon et à l'OIBT pour leur appui aux femmes du milieu rural, et nous espérons avoir d'autres appuis pour consolider nos acquis.
So that is one of the more recent examples of a highly successful project which had strong commitment and involvement of the ITTO. It is projects like this that highlight the stark reality on the ground and the challenges in which we face in terms of involving actors from tropical countries. And as you can see with that particular project, it has multiple pronged benefits. And one of the more important elements that was highlighted by the project is the equality and the empowerment of women in a society that undervalues the contributions of women to their daily livelihoods. Okay, so you will have copies of that video actually on the ITTO website if you're interested. And we also have plans to not to say replicate, but to closely re-emphasize the importance of these projects in various different parts of the world. Now we go back to our panel of speakers for their one-liner or two-liner contributions as to what they hope to see as an outcome of this session towards the GLF 2019 or even towards the COP24. So can we follow the same roster as we did before? Hiroto?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, it's my impression is, so maybe this one. So the land restoration, forest restoration is a quite a good challenge, opportunity at the same time challenge the futures. But each component is quite basic, which means that like charcoal production, adding logging, and also carbon stock as well, which means that, so back to futures, which means back to the basic. So let me back to the basic at the same time to identify the good scenarios and also good formulas to utilize this component. That is my findings.
Thank you, Hiroto. Thank you. Geez, that was a long one actually, but still. I'm struggling. I'll have to talk to you again after that. Miriam, something for you?
Maybe the key message coming out of this event and talking about supply chains, the last 2 days, yesterday and today. I think maybe a better evaluation and recognition of benefits of landscape approach to supply chains. I think this is something that's as yet still in its infancy, and I think there's still lots to be gained there. We see very much, for example, in shade landscapes, when households come under stress, even though they recognize the value of shade trees, they can harvest them, sell them for charcoal, for food and other things. Now, if we also consider that smallholders are the largest private sector globally, then we have to start realizing that perhaps having invested in a more livelihoods approach within value chains might have prevented those things from happening. And I think that this can have a very large trickle-through effect to having better models. And I think with that also would come new partnerships within the private sector itself, between the agricultural and forestry industry, so to speak. So I'm talking about the larger corporate private sectors. Because yesterday I was asked who's going to drive change. Well, maybe we can look elsewhere as well.
Thank you, Miriam. Very constructive also, especially when it concerns the private sector. I mean, they are involved in several efforts already, but I think it's a case of consolidating, maybe realigning them again towards our aims. Thank you, Miriam. Jürgen, anything to contribute?
Yeah, of course I have a lot of issues, but in respect to what I spoke about, I think it is clear that I want to see, even that we have that focus on plantation and developing future functional landscapes, I do think that it is important also to look at how can we bring degraded forest back to functioning natural forests. No, that wing, for me, this is a little bit lacking. Also the discussion yesterday, today, I think, fine, this focus on plantation and planting and so on, but it takes time. We have an asset, which is degraded natural forest, that we can bring as a functional element into the broader landscape, and I think we should not forget that.
Thank you very much, Jürgen. You're right, sometimes when we sit here for hours and days discussing and talking, several very obvious elements are very often buried or they disappear into the background for no given reason. Thank you for that. Robert?
Well, I've not been wild, but maybe you can hear myself if I speak loud enough.
You have a microphone, right?
No, I don't.
Oh, you don't? Oh, how?
He's
Sorry.
outspoken enough.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. You hear me?
Now, yes.
I think we need to be clear we need to conserve the primary and touch forest. I'm talking about the tropical forest. Let's say that I limit myself to tropical forest. We need to conserve what we have now in terms of primary and touch forests. It's atrocious to think that in some places, some primary forest is cut to produce pulp and paper or to produce or for agricultural purpose. So we need to keep as much as we can, and we should keep whatever is left on the natural primary forest or untouched forest. We have a large amount of what Jürgen calls degraded natural forest or secondary logged over. We should manage them sustainably to produce sustainable wood. And we have a large amount of area like that. And unfortunately, in many places, these forests are considered as degraded, so they can be cut to do something else. Well, in fact, empirical evidence shows that the forests, they have a lot of value in terms of biodiversity. They have a lot of value in terms of storage of carbon. So we should manage sustainably the amount of secondary log-over forest we have. And then we have an even bigger area of degraded land. And we should restore this degraded land for a sort of rough, I think, 1/3 for ecosystem services, 1/3 for product, and 1/3 for whatever else. So we should make a great effort in restoring degraded land for productive and environmental value. And we also need to make sure that the value that is derived from this product or restored land goes to the people that do the restoration, the small and medium-sized enterprise or the local community. So that's what we should do. Are we going to do it? It's a different question.
Thank you, Robert. And last but not least, Gerhard, please.
I think what is very important to keep in mind that without restoring our lands, the forest and other landscapes, we will have a bad future in front of us for humanity, for climate, and for the benefit of people. So investments in these landscapes is absolutely necessary if we want to keep 1.5 degrees Celsius, but also if we want to keep our people in the world, what we call woods, in a state of wood security for basic needs. Nobody in governments or in donor communities can finance that restoration. It's too expensive, so it has to come from the bottom, from the base, private action, smallholders, bigger, a mix of small and big, and so on. And I think for making that successful, we need in the legal, institutional, policy environment, good governance, land rights. That is one complex. We need to have the capacities of these players, that they understand the landscape restoration approach, what is sustainable, what is legal, so that they can participate in something which benefits them. And the third is access to finance. And I think if we have the first two in place, the risk for an investment organization, a bank, is much lower to provide money for these investments and so on. So bottom-up process, support from the top, from governments, and support from building capacities. I think these are the three ingredients which we need to have in place. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gerhard. Thank you. And now my feeble attempt at trying to put all that together in one line would be something like, with, simplified version, I'm a girl. So it is something like we need to urgently boost action on the ground towards sustainable tropical landscapes by ensuring economic viability while significantly contributing to the enhancement of livelihoods and several of the SDGs of 2030. I hope that's a fair reflection. So I thank you all for your attention and for spending time with us. And just to let you know, ITTO is having a little workshop downstairs due to start in the next 10 minutes on supply chains. We haven't quite figured out what we're going to do, but, but we hope to have some fun down there. Thank you so much for your time, and a big hand for the speakers. Thank you all. Thank you all.